wouldn't it be neat if there was a way that we could capture those songs and play them back on other things? A PC 6300 was not worth the 3-hour drive up and back to Enumclaw, but what was worth it was this. So I set about to create a piece of software for these PCs that could play back those songs on these computers.
Tales of Weird Stuff presents Mindscape Music Board.
Back on, I'm going to say December 9th, 2022, I was sort of casually browsing eBay listings, not really looking for anything specific, just kind of looking for entertainment purposes. If you're watching this channel or a channel like this one, you probably understand what I mean. And at the time, I was looking specifically at listings for AT&T PC 6300s. I had done a couple videos, doing some repairs on them. I think one of the very first videos, maybe even the first video, second video. I think the second video that I did for the channel was about a PC 6300, and then in 2022 I had acquired a second one and had been working on that. And I really wanted to find the special mouse for the PC 6300. There's a specific mouse for it that connects to a connector on the back of the keyboard. It looks like a serial mouse connector, but it's not. It's a quadrature encoding, kind of like an Amiga mouse. I'm pretty sure it's a quadrature encoding like an Amiga mouse, but it's its own special thing. There are also a couple cards specific to the PC 6300 and the Olivetti M24. Those computers have 8-bit slots that then at the other end they have an extra connector to make it 16-bit because they use 8086 CPUs that have a 16-bit bus. So they're not AT Isobus, but it is a 16-bit bus, and there's a very small number of cards that specifically use that bus. So I thought, all right, well, I'll just go through and look through the listings and see if maybe there's a computer on here that has one of those cards in it. And I don't know, just for entertainment purposes. And I was looking down through the listings and I stumbled on this one that I think, I want to say it was listed for $190 plus shipping. So there was no way I was going to pay $190 for a third PC 6300. Spoiler alert. But I decided to look at it because I was just kind of looking at all the listings and just flipping through the pictures. I'm going to give away a tip. People often ask me, like, how do you find such good stuff at garage sales and estate sales? My tip is, in the ads for those that they post on Craigslist or various sites specific to garage sales and estate sales, look at all of the pictures. And don't just look at what they took a picture of. Look at the stuff in the background that they didn't think was interesting enough to take a picture of. I have found so many things where I see something in the back and I see like the corner of a thing. I recognize that case shape. I know what that is. I'm gonna go get that. And because they didn't think it was anything, often that's how you get the best deals. So I'm looking through these pictures and I noticed that it has what looks to be a sound card in it, because it had a 3.5mm jack and it had what appeared to be a volume knob. There were no sound cards that used that weird 16-bit bus, so it would just be an 8-bit ISA sound card. And for the most part, 8-bit ISA sound cards that have a volume knob are really old sound cards, and they tend to be expensive. So I thought, okay, well, I'll look a little more closely at it. Maybe the person would part it out and would just sell that card. I don't know. So I looked at it, and I looked at, there was a picture of the inside, none of the pictures could you really see the cards that well. And so nothing jumped out as like, hi, I'm the sound card. So I was kind of looking through and I could see the corner of one of the cards. I thought, okay, that must be in about the position where that card would be. And I saw, silk screened on the board, Mindscape Music Board. I thought, what? I don't know what that is. I've never heard of that. Now, in areas where I collect and where I know something about the things, I'm not going to claim to be an expert at anything, but where I know some things, what I have found is if I stumble across something that I don't know what it is, there's one of two possibilities. Either it's junk. I don't know what it is because it was such insignificant trash that nobody cares about it. Or it's pure gold. Quite a number of years ago, I want to say maybe like 2016, like quite a while ago, I went to a garage sale where the guy was clearing out this house that had been a rental, and his renter had basically just abandoned the house and all the stuff in it. So the guy had to sit on all this stuff, and the guy was a hoarder. Like, it was a ridiculous house. So the guy had to sit on this house of this dude's stuff that he had abandoned for a really long time per state law, and then was just like, I need to get all this crap out of here. So he was just liquidating all this stuff out. And I had been talking to him, and I bought a bunch of stuff. I had bought a ton of, if I remember correctly, I had bought like a dozen Atari 7800 cartridges complete in box. He's like, oh, are you interested in video games and computer stuff? And I asked him, I'm like, yeah. Do you have more in there? He's like, oh my, yes, there's more. So went inside the house with the guy, and it is all of the bad things that you think of when someone says hoarder house. So I start looking through some of the computers and kind of picking through some of the stuff. And he's like, and I've got some of these other Nintendo games, and I can't get internet here. I don't know what to ask for them. And I remember specifically one of them was Mega Man for the NES. It was complete in box, and I had a relatively good idea of what that was worth. So I made him what I thought was a good offer for it. And the other game, I did not know what this game was. I had never heard of it. And I told the guy, I said, I collect this stuff. I don't know everything. I've never heard of that game. And that either means that it's junk or that it's super valuable. And I have no idea which. And neither one of us could get any internet. And he said, well, would you give me $50 for it? And I'm like, it's kind of going to put me past my budget today. And I don't know if it's actually worth that. And I hemmed and I hawed. And so that is the day that I did not buy complete in box Bucky O'Hare for $50. I have kicked myself many times, for that, for just not knowing. So when I saw Mindscape Music Board, and I thought, I don't know what that is, I'm at my house, I have internet. So I searched, I'm going to find this out. There is not a lot of information about Mindscape Music Board on the internet. I came across one article by a guy named Jim Leonard, who you may have heard of. He's done a couple interesting things. He had a blog post where he was talking about early PC sound cards that weren't AdLib or Sound Blaster, in that sort of like general class of sound cards. One of the cards that he mentioned was the Mindscape Music Board. And there was two things that he mentioned about it that caught my attention. The first thing that he mentioned is there is zero software support for this card. The only, or nearly zero, the only piece of software that supports it is this piece of software called Bank Street Music Writer that came bundled with the card. Or rather, I think it was they were selling the software and the card came bundled with it. The other thing that he said was that as far as he knew, there was one of those cards that existed in the world, and it was the one that he owned. Well, that caught my attention, for sure. And I looked at my watch and I thought, well, step back. I looked closer at the listing. The listing was something thrift, and it said the location was Enumclaw, Washington. So I looked up on maps, thrift store, Enumclaw, Washington, and it came up with a place that had like the same name as the eBay name. Like, all right, well, that's the place. And I looked like, what time do they close? All right, well, if I could break the world land speed record in my Prius, I could get there tonight before they close. So that's out. It's Friday. Saturday, I have an event like all day long that I'm doing setup and teardown for. So I can't go on Saturday. They're closed on Sunday. Well, I guess I'm going to take Monday off from work and I'm going to drive up there. Now, I could have just bought it on eBay, but the shipping was like $70. And shipping would have been $70. I would have had to wait for it. And I had a worry that sometimes parts like that disappear out of old computers. And like, I didn't want it to be a whole big thing. Like I wanted to have it in my hand before I turned over money. Right? So that Monday, I got up early and drove. I think it ended up being, I don't remember what maps said it should be, but I seem to recall that the actual drive time was about 3 hours and 15 minutes to get there. Went into the thrift store, said, hey, I saw this item on your eBay listing. I'm here in person. Can I just buy it? And I think I also had some idea that because then they weren't going to lose a chunk to eBay fees, that maybe I could get it a little bit cheaper, or that maybe there'd be some negotiating room. I'm trying to remember. I had some other reason why I actually drove up there, and I know for sure that I pulled out cash and I paid cash for it, but it's been over 2 years at this point. That's how long this whole story has been going on. It will take less time for me to finish telling it. And the woman at the counter said, yes, you can buy that. You can buy that, but the guy who does all that stuff for the electronics and the computers, and they did have a bunch of things listed, he doesn't work on Mondays. So we're not 100% sure where it is. We'll go back and look for it. You might need to come back tomorrow. I'm like, well, I drove up from Portland. I'll be 3 hours away tomorrow. Okay, well, maybe we can, if we can't find it, maybe we can call him and find out where it is, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So they go back to look for it. And I just wandered around. It was, other than a reasonable sized corner that was computers and video game stuff, like I think there was a PlayStation 3 there and some other stuff like that. It was a thrift store. It had, furniture and kitchen stuff and clothes. I bought this shirt there that day. So yeah, I wandered around and looked at the rest of the stuff and came back, and we found it. They brought it out and they looked at it, and I asked if they were open to offers on it. I'd driven up from Portland. I was going to save them the 20%, whatever. So they said, well, we'll take off. I think what they did was they offered to take off what the sales tax would be, which in that part of Washington, it was 9.2% or something. So I didn't have to pay sales tax, because if I had ordered it online from eBay, I wouldn't have had to pay sales tax, but I would have had to. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So I got it for the $190. And I went out to my car and I opened the back of my Prius and I set it down there and I opened it up and I made the YouTube short that I posted on that day. I posted it from right there in that parking lot on December 12th. And it was this card that was inside it. Now, the Mindscape Music Board is essentially a Mockingboard for PCs. And that we've found, I've been collaborating with Jim Leonard on this project off and on for literally the last 2 years. There is some early marketing material for this that refers to it as the PC Mockingboard. And that is 85% what this is. So this card is 2 AY3 8913 sound chips. These are PSGs. Each chip generates 3 square waves and a noise channel. There is I don't think it's a full ADSR envelope generator, but it's an envelope generator, but there's one for the whole chip. And so each channel can enable or disable the use of the envelope generator, or you can just program, you can set the volume level programmatically. So that part is the same as a Mockingboard. Where it differs from a Mockingboard is at least some Mockingboards also had sockets for 2 speech synthesis chips. And this does not have that. It does not have any capability for that. Also, the Mockingboard is stereo, where each one of the sound chips drives either the left or the right. And this, as you can tell from there only being 2 wires going into the jack, is mono. Not only is it mono, it's a really, really crummy jack. So I'm going to plug this cable in so you can kind of see here. So the thing about this jack, other than it being, this specific one being very kind of wiggly and loose, is on a stereo plug, I think where the other connection in here kind of connects like somewhere right about in the middle of this break and doesn't cross the whole thing. When I very, very first hooked this up and put it in a computer, I tried to play sound on it and nothing came out. And I was really scared. Okay, I have one of very few sound cards and mine don't work. So okay, well, I guess a repair video is interesting. Hopefully I can sort it out. And I moved the computer that it was in and it jiggled the jack a little bit. And I heard a little bit of very, very quiet sound come out. I thought, oh, maybe it's just the knob. And I moved the knob and no, all I could get was really, really quiet sound. I thought, well, that's weird. I don't know how to interpret that. So I think I had the computer set up on the floor and I unhooked it all and hooked it back up. And when it was on the floor, I had I have these sets of Bose Companion 2 computer speakers, which I love. I have like 6 sets of those. I like those speakers a lot. They work really well. But the way that the speakers are is everything connects into the left speaker. Power, your audio source connects into the left speaker, and that's where all the stuff happens. And then there's a single cable that comes from the right speaker to connect into the left. Well, I had been lazy and I had only hooked up the left speaker. And this plug here sucks. And it doesn't really output to the left speaker. So when I moved it up onto the desk, I actually hooked up both speakers. The right speaker started playing at expected volume levels, and the left speaker, like, you could put your ear right up to it, and it's like, oh yeah, I can hear something there. If I squint, if I squint my ears, I can hear something. So it's a really crummy plug that nearly caused me to have a coronary event. In addition, this has some kind of a jumper block, and all of the pictures of this card that I've been able to find, the jumpers or the switches are configured thusly. In the intervening time since I posted that YouTube short, Jim contacted me, and we've been kind of working on this off and on. And he found someone else who has one of these cards. He is also going to be publishing a video that I think is going to come out the week after this video comes out. I'll put a card right now, and I will put a permanent link in the description below to his video. He's going to talk more about the history of the card and how it came to be. I'm not going to steal his thunder. He found someone else who has one of these cards. So that was 3. And then earlier this year, someone from Finland, I believe from Finland, had posted some shorts on YouTube of songs playing through Bank Street Music Writer on one of these cards. And then that person sold that card that was complete in box with the software and the manuals and the whole thing on eBay. Jim and I have also been in contact with the person who bought that card. So we know of 4, and we know of someone who has the manual. And the manual says, configure the switches thusly. So I'm guessing that this sets the I/O port, because there's no interrupts. So the only thing it could be is the I/O port, and it doesn't say what the switches do. And all of the software, as far as we can tell, is hard-coded. All of the one piece of software is hard-coded for one port address, which I'll get to a little bit later. So now, having advanced almost 2 years in this project, 1.5 years anyway, there are 2 problems with this card. One, there's still no software that uses it except Bank Street Music Writer. So if you would like to compose some songs for this card, Bank Street Music Writer supports this, and somewhat coincidentally also supports Tandy Sound. You can compose some music for it. But there's no games. And then the other problem is it's not the rarest PC sound card in the world anymore, because we know of 4 of them. There's at least one other sound card, PC sound card, that is now more rare than this. And that card is the Covox Soundmaster. Now, Covox made a number of things, including a pretty well-known digital audio sound card that plugs into PC Parallel Port. The Soundmaster is similar to this card. It has an AY8930. They dropped the -3 stuff in the middle of the name. And the 8930 is a somewhat advanced version of the 8910 family of sound chips. It has an envelope at least per square wave channel. I'm not sure if there's a separate envelope for the noise channel or not. I don't recall. It also has more bits for specifying the frequency, so you can literally fine tune it more. And it may have 1 or 2 other special things, but for the most part, it is it is backwards compatible with the 8910 family. You can program it exactly like an 8910, or you can use some of those advanced features. It has one of those chips. It also has some stuff on it to give it a DMA-driven 8-bit digital audio channel, kind of like Sound Blasters. There are a handful of games that support the Soundmaster. Specifically, Ultima 6 has Soundmaster support, and I want to say some versions of Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego has support for that. One of the things I'm going to do, still coming in this video, is I'm going to play around with some of those and see if I can get that software, because it's the same sound chip. Like, it's a real simple sound chip. Is there some way that we can coerce that software made for this other to run on this? Now this lives, one of these chips lives at port addresses 300 and 301, and the other one lives at 302 and 303, and I'm pointing at them as if I know which is which, and I sure don't. It would be easy enough to hook up an oscilloscope and figure it out. I have not done that. And the Soundmaster, they actually document their jumper settings for the port addresses, and they're all, I remember that 220 is the default address, and there are some other addresses, and the highest selectable address is 2C0. I was disappointed that the manual for this doesn't say how to set this, because it might be possible to just configure these switches some way to have one of these chips be at 2C0, and that would be, we'd be done. The games that the games that support the Soundmaster, some of them support it for music using the AY chip. Some of them support it for digital audio. There are very few. I actually don't know if there are any that support it for both, which seems kind of weird. And there is only one game, and I had looked it up right before I started recording this, and I forgot. There is one game that uses the special features of the 8930. One. But for sure, I'm trying to remember now. Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? Ultima 6. I want to say Conan the Cimmerian supports it for music, and maybe like 4 or 5 others. There's a list. I'll provide a link in the description. So maybe there's some way that we could either, tell that software what port address to use, or hack the software. One of the things that people did with Tandy Sound is the original Tandy 1000s, the sound chip lived at port address C0. In the PC AT architecture, something else uses port C0 that's part of the motherboard architecture. It's where the other programmable interrupt controller lives. So in a couple of the later Tandys that have that sound chip, they had to move it, and they moved it to, I want to say, 1E0. So there is 2 ways that people got older software to work on those newer Tandys. Either you hack the binary so that you figure out where it's writing to port C0 and instead make it write to port 1E0, or there is a piece of software that uses what's it called? Virtual 8086 mode on a 386 or later processor, so that you can insert this sort of shim layer, so that anytime a piece of software writes to, I think it's just if it writes to a specific port, it will fault into this other software, kind of like a page fault, but different. And then that software will say, oh, you're writing to C0, let me redirect that write to where the sound chip actually lives. It might be possible to do something like that. Now that is way beyond my skills for retro DOS hacking. figuring out where the port rights are is probably more doable, but is still, that is a lot of tedious work. To figure out how to actually program this. So a few months ago, I did a video where I had written a sound player, VGM, video game music player, for Tandy Music. A few weeks ago, I updated that software to be able to support dual of those, the Tandy sound chips, the actual Texas Instruments sound chip. There were a bunch of arcade machines that had multiple of those sound chips in it. Because if you have a Tandy 1000, there are add-in boards that have one of those sound chips on it. There was one made by a couple companies have made them over the years. So you could have two of those sound chips, and so I have enhanced my VGM player to support that. All of that was subterfuge. The whole reason I wrote that piece of software was to make it run on this, which I've also done. The way that I figured out how to program this, Jim had found a YouTube video where someone had apparently had a hacked version of DOSBox that would log port writes, and in the description of the video they said, oh yeah, we found it writes to port 300 and port 302, blah, blah. And that was like all the information. I started just basically programming it like it was the Texas Instruments sound chip in a Tandy 1000, where you just write everything to the one port address to do all the things, to control all the waveforms. So you write to, hey, I'm going to set this sound generator, and then you write the value that you want to send to it, and you write it all to the one port. So I started doing that, and it didn't work. And instead of doing probably the easy thing, which would have been search around and figure out how people program this on other computers, how do people program the sound chips on an MSX? Because I'm sure there is lots of information about that, and it's probably done about the same way. I thought, you know what? I know of something that programs this sound chip. I'll just disassemble Bank Street Music Writer. So I did, and I went through and I found, like, I'm looking for places in the code where it's going to load 300 hex into DX, and then it's going to do an out instruction. Even my meager reverse engineering skills, I bet I can track that down. And I did. And so the way that it works, and I have since found out this is how you do it on MSX and other computers, is to one address you write, here is the internal register I'm going to write to, and then to the other port you write, this is the value that I'm gonna send to it. And so with that, I was able within a day to get my VGM player working on this card, and that made me pretty happy. So that was the big secret thing that I've been technically working on for 2 years. So how about if we go ahead and stop looking at this sound card, and how about if we listen to it? All right, well, this will be the big test of the new microphone to see if it can handle computer fan noise. All right, so I'm just going to play, I think, maybe one or two songs. These are MSX songs, so they're only using a single of the AY chips. I have found some songs from someone had captured, I think, from Ultima 5, and they captured on some kind of a weird setup that is not compatible with my software. I think what they did was captured from the description of the file, and what I see, the writes that I see in the file, it looks like it was captured on a setup that has 2 Mockingboards, because it's just very odd. It's doing a bunch of stuff to, like, select which voices go to which speakers, and anyway, It's not going to work on this card, so I haven't even bothered to make that work. But some of these songs sound fine. I mean, sound close enough to how the MP3 versions of them on VGMRips.net sound that I'm going to call it good. This particular song is, as you can see from the screen, is from the MSX version of Metal Gear. Now the other thing I can do is I can play that same song again, and I can have it, so it's going to play on, it's only using a single of the AY chips. It's playing on the first one, the one at address 300, so I can trick it and I can tell it, no, the PSG's at 302, and it'll play on the other one. And it's going to sound the same. Spoiler alert! So that was how I did some of my testing to make sure I was getting at both of them correctly. I mean, it is entirely possible that I'm doing it wrong and a dual track song would totally fail, but I think it's good. I did try to get Ultima 6 working on here, on this sound card, and it didn't. So the way that I did that was, when I have two directories on here for a reason. So if you run the installer, I'm just going to say hard drive, C, VGA, no. Okay, so you can pick the sound, and I'm going to pick the Covox Soundmaster, and it gives a selection of possible I/O addresses. And so what I did was I did this twice. And for one of them, I picked 220, and for the other one, I picked 2C0. And then I installed them to two separate directories, and then on a Linux computer, I used the CMP program which compares binary files to see, okay, it has to store that information somewhere. Where is it storing it? So it stores it in a file called config.u6, and which I may regret this, which is a binary file, but it has ASCII text in it that is the port. So in the other directory, I think it's in the other directory. So in here, I just went in with an editor program and changed it to say 300 instead of 2C0, and thought, oh, can it be this easy? However, when it starts up, there's no sound. It wasn't that easy. So that means one of two things. Either the Covox card and this card are programmed differently, or Ultima is doing validation on that file and says 300, no, that's not valid, and just does something different. So there is still some hope of getting some other software on here. There's a couple other programs that I am going to try, and we'll see if I can get something else running. I've tried just about every game that I can get my hands on that claims to have support for the Covox Soundmaster. It has not gone particularly well. I'm going to run down the list here of what I tried. Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego and Prince of Persia, both Broderbund games, versions that were old enough to seem like they had Covox Soundmaster support, which I determined by using the Unix strings command on the binaries to try to find things that looked like strings and see if it had the string Covox somewhere in the binary. They didn't have a setup program, so I couldn't figure out how to tell them to use anything other than PC Speaker. I got nowhere with those. versions that were a little bit newer that had a setup program didn't have Covox support. There was no way to select that. Sim Earth is just fabulous. Do I still have that on here? Oops, if I can type. No, I got it off here. So its configuration file has a single line in it that says sound mode :C. That's how it selects Covox. So there's no way to configure IO ports or anything on that. The game Bad Blood uses the exact same setup program as Ultima 6 because it's another Origin game, and it has the same issues as Origin 6. I have to edit the text file, and then it just doesn't seem to work. So the game here that I'm at, Spirit of Excalibur, so it has these driver files, and because that is a much smaller thing to look at, I looked at the Covox DVR file and just looked for a place where I found what looked like 220 hex, because its setup program also had no way to specify the IO port. But if I could find 220 hex somewhere in the program, in that 6K blob, it's probably writing to the default Covox base address. I changed that to 300 hex using a hex editor, and the program runs, but we get no sound. So that was a bummer. The other two games that I tried were Twilight 2000 and Mega Traveler 2. In both of those, they have config files that appeared to have the specified IO port address encoded in the config file, so I modified that using a hex editor to be 300, and they start to load and then hang. Now, both those games, the installer, in addition to wanting to set the IO port address, wants to know an IRQ and a DMA channel, so I'm assuming that they are both also trying to use digital audio on it, on the Covox card. That obviously doesn't exist on this card, and so when it gets to waiting for an interrupt to come back from the Covox card, it never happens, and so it just hangs. It doesn't seem like we're going to be able to trivially modify existing games to use this card, and that's a huge bummer. It may be possible. It will probably be a lot more work. What it's kind of hinting to me is that the protocol for writing to the chips on the Covox card is just different than it is on the Mindscape Music Board. So they're not trivially compatible with each other. So where does that leave the future for this card? And the three others like it. Well, given the scarcity of them, it seems unlikely that any open source game projects are going to rush out to add support for these. It seems to be a bit of a dead end. Or at least it did until not terribly long ago. Since I got this board and started being interested in this sound card as a project, another thing got invented. I'm sure folks in the retro PC community will at this point be familiar with this very, very cool card. This is a PicoGus. And I think that the way that the PicoGus can play into this is, I've already used this PicoGus to implement dual Tandy sound chip support in my VGM player. I configured this as Tandy sound chip, put it at, I don't even remember, I think I tried it at a couple different IO addresses, put it in my Tandy 1000 that already has a Tandy sound chip at C0, configured my software, and off it went. I'm in the process of modifying the Tandy sound support on this to just natively support dual Tandy sound, which means you could put this in any computer and say, configure it to have dual Tandy sound, put them at separate IO port addresses, and off you go. Given the similarity between these two sound chips and the Tandy sound chip and the sound chip used in the Creative Game Blaster, which is also already supported by this, it's going to be pretty trivial, I think, famous last words, I know, to take that support and modify it so that the PicoGus can just emulate one of these. And then, you know, maybe it's a little bit more interesting to add support for this old card to modern games and things that people are doing with retro PCs. I don't know. I mean, most of this stuff that I do, I do because it's there. Like, why'd you do that? Well, because I could. Right? I mean, that's kind of the nature of this hobby. So hopefully, over the next few weeks or months or less than 2 more years, I'll get that dual Tandy support implemented for this. I have gotten it as far as compiling the source code for the firmware and getting the firmware loaded on here. And then I've started making just some trivial kind of get ready for kind of refactoring changes to the software. So it's not very far along yet. But as it progresses, I will post updates. I'll probably just post shorts or something. I don't think it'll warrant a full video. If you have enjoyed this video, I would really, really appreciate a like. I've been working on this project, off and on in various steps for, it feels like forever at this point. If you would like to see the future updates on the related projects and are interested in more unusual things like this, I have picked up a bunch of odd PC upgrades and more goofy cards and all kinds of different stuff. I could probably do videos until the end of time if I could just get on it and do it. If you would like to see those videos, should they ever materialize, I highly recommend that you click the subscribe button. And until next time, try to remember the good stuff.